drill in the North Sea, we will get millions and billions in tax revenue, which we can use to subsidize household bills. And that's how we get the price down. And in fact, if our gas, we could be getting before the winter, that could power up to 1.6 million households a year. That's very critical.
You're not the only politician in the North East today. John Swinney is here, and he said that if he becomes First Minister again, he would push for the powers to control energy policy. Would you support that, and do you trust him to control Scotland's energy?
I do not trust John Swinney to control Scotland's energy because he does not want to drill on North Sea oil and gas. The SNP's policy is pretty non-committal. So if he took control of those powers, we would still not be drilling. What we need to do right now is allow new licenses, make sure that we can drill our own oil and gas in the North Sea and use those revenues to help the people of Scotland.
And just moving on to Iran, would you support sending the Royal Navy in to keep the Strait of Hormuz open? And would you back Donald Trump if he was to send US troops to invade Karg Island?
So sending troops to Karg Island is an escalation. What I want to see is a de-escalation of this war. I do not have the security and operational details to understand exactly what we would be sending our Navy to do in the Strait of Hormuz. But what we do need to do is make sure that we're looking after the British national interest and that we can do everything within our power to deal with this oil price shock. The best thing we can do within our power right now is to start drilling our own resources, and that is North Sea oil and gas. We need to start now. It is becoming an emergency, and the reason why the government is not doing anything is because they brought in all these targets and they want to save face. We cannot allow the whole country to suffer to save Ed Miliband embarrassment.
Just quickly, sorry, on your plans to make energy cheaper, when would Brits see their energy bills be reduced, and how much by?
Well, what we're talking about on scrapping VAT on energy bills, we could do that immediately. We could do that immediately. So right now, the government has a choice, and they're choosing they're making bad choices. Just like with the fuel duty rise, which they're planning, with everything that's going on, an oil price shock, we're seeing diesel almost doubling in price, and Rachel Reeves wants to price gouge consumers by adding an extra 5p on fuel duty. I think that's a disgrace.
What we're doing today is publishing draft legislation which would essentially rewind the clock back to the point before the Supreme Court ruling last year, which instructed new oil and gas fields to take account of the upstream emissions which are created by what they produce. That was then interpreted by the Court of Session in Edinburgh, which prevented the Jackdaw and Rosebank fields from progressing, even though we had approved that. The government failed to appeal that decision, and so we're in the situation now that the law is preventing these things from going ahead unless the Secretary of State determines otherwise. So what we want to say is, let's turn the clock back, let's get the law back into a place which does allow these to go ahead. And as a result of those fields being approved, and indeed other fields being approved, if we overturn the ban on licenses, we could see, the equivalent of 30 billion to 40 billion pounds worth of revenue being generated by an oil and gas industry going flat out, maximising economic recovery here in the UK. That, combined with our slashing of the green levies and subsidies that are on everybody's bills, and indeed the VAT on energy, which we are wanting to get rid of for the next 3 years, could see a reduction in people's bills of £200, and I think that would be a very good thing indeed. Even a very conservative estimate puts the amount of gas left in the North Sea as being able to support 50% of the UK's gas demand up until at least 2050 and beyond. That's a significant amount, but we're depriving ourselves of that resource, and we're importing more than ever at a higher cost and a bigger carbon footprint as a result of this absurd and perverse ban on getting what we can out of British waters. If we could generate more in the North Sea, we could employ more people, we could generate more revenue for the Treasury, and we could become more energy secure. Nobody disputes that it's an aging basin. Nobody disputes that there's less oil and gas under the British waters than there was 40 to 50 years ago. But everybody sees a sense in getting what we can out of what is left. Apart from that is Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary. I think Keir Starmer's idea of being Prime Minister as being a mannequin atop of a government, not actually being able to take any decisions. Yes, as the law stands right now, it is up to the Secretary of State for Energy to make the decision as to whether or not Jackdaw and Rosebank go ahead, but he could instruct the Energy Secretary to take a decision without telling him what that decision should be. He could also tell him to speed up his taking of that decision, and he could also remove the Energy Secretary if he takes the wrong decision, and indeed could change the law if he wants a decision to go in a certain way. That's what we would do. That's what we're saying we would do today by this draft bill, and so I very much hope he listens to us. the energy industry, the oil and gas industry, are some of the biggest investors in renewables projects. They want to see a transition. They've been investing in the transition, but they also need to have a profitable base through which to invest. They also need the skilled workforce and the supply chain, which are going to be crucial to a transition here in the UK, to have a base from which to operate. Right now, those jobs, that work, those projects do not exist in the numbers that they need to sustain those companies in the UK, to generate the profit and to maintain the workforce. That workforce is declining. Those jobs are going overseas. Companies are shutting up shop. And people are looking at the North Sea as an uninvestable destination. We want to turn that around. If you believe in the transition, you believe we've got a renewable future, that's great. But these companies are going to need to have an operating profit to begin with, so that they can then move into cleaner energy generating technologies. So of course we want to see a transition, but we also believe that shouldn't come at an exorbitant cost to British tax or British bill payers, which is why we want to see the green levies and subsidies reduced, and we want to see these companies, standing on their own 2 feet. The idea that we didn't invest in the grid or in new technology is nonsense. We absolutely did. The reason that they're having to build what they're having to build, disrupting so many communities across the United Kingdom in the process and costing British bill payers billions of pounds, is because they are building huge wind farms in parts of the country where energy generation was not originally planned for. We have got a fantastic grid, but it's connected to specific locations: coal-fired power stations, gas-fired power stations, nuclear power stations. Small areas of land compared to the vast areas that are being used by onshore wind, for example. So the greater size of these wind farms, the more diverse locations of these energy generating hotspots, is going to require more transmission infrastructure. So it's because this government are pressing ahead at the speed at which they are, that they're having to spend the amount that they are in building this new grid. Yes, of course, we need new energy infrastructure. Of course, we need to keep the lights on in this country. But the reason that we're seeing so many communities disrupted and so much being spent on this is because of Labour's plans to rush, ahead with new renewables projects and not focus on building the new nuclear plants, the new gas plants that we're going to need anyway, even if we reach the fantastical heights of Ed Miliband's fantasies to begin with.
Well, it's fantastic. This is the full first week of the campaign, and the UK leader Kemi Badenoch is up here. And the reason she's up here is because our party supports Scotland's oil and gas industry. Aberdeen Harbour is the oldest business in Britain. It survived the Vikings, but I'm worried that under Ed Miliband and John Swinney's anti-oil and gas policies, it might not survive. There's a very real risk. One oil industry executive described to me the quiet annihilation of Scotland's oil and gas industry. We need to drill for the oil and gas in the North Sea. We need to bring down people's bills and have a proper future, not a renewables future that is based upon stopping the flow right now, which is in nobody's interest. Just look at the events around the world right now, the volatility, the spike in prices at the forecourts. So a third of the price of wholesale energy in the UK is due to net zero levies imposed by Ed Miliband and Sir Keir Starmer. That could be dealt with immediately. The VAT on fuel, the only people profiteering at the forecourt right now with these rising pump prices are the UK Labour government through VAT. That could be dealt with right now. There's a lot that could be done. And also, every single bit of gas coming out of the North Sea is used domestically. This myth that it's not being used in the UK market is just completely wrong. We need to drill for oil and gas. We need to support this fantastic world-leading industry on our doorstep and make the most of what we have, and that will help to fuel a just transition towards renewables.
We know that John Swinney says that if the SNP get a majority at Holyrood, they'll push for a second independence referendum, but we also know it would take Keir Starmer allowing that to happen. If the SNP does win a majority, do you believe that Keir Starmer would allow a second independence referendum?
Well, I think a lot of people are being quite complacent and a little bit naive about the threat of another independence referendum. The last thing Scotland needs is the division and damage of more constitutional wrangling. But of course, that's all John Swinney truly cares about. And there is a very real risk. If you don't vote Scottish Conservatives using your peach-coloured ballot paper to stop an SNP majority, there's a very real risk that John Swinney will turn up at Downing Street if he does get a majority, that nightmare scenario, and you've got a weak Prime Minister who will roll over, as he's done so many times in the past.
And just moving on again, you admitted that you won't become First Minister in this election, and you've also said...
Have I?
Yes, you have. You said you're not run to be First Minister, right?
What I've said is, look, I'm an optimist. I know that our party has the people and the plans, the best interests of Scotland, it's credible, costed plans. But in all likelihood, I and many of the other party leaders in Scotland aren't likely to be First Minister. But that doesn't mean that we can't make a difference. That doesn't mean that we can't put forward a proper vision. We've had 25 plus years of a failed left-wing consensus at Holyrood, where taxes have only ever gone up, benefits are now out of control, and we're being honest with the people of Scotland. We want to reduce the cost of living in this election and hold the SNP's feet to the fire, and crucially, stop that majority that John Swinney is already saying is nailed on.
Okay, you've said that about your chance of being First Minister. You've also said you'd never vote for an SNP First Minister. You were saying that just there. I mean, realistically, that's you saying to Anna Sarwar, I'll help you get into Bute House, isn't it?
Anna Sarwar might want to help me. The point is, I will never put an SNP government into a position. I'll never vote for an SNP First Minister.
But you'd vote for a Labour government, or you at least abstain to let them get?
Scotland has suffered almost 20 years under the SNP. They've made a complete mess of this country. Their dismal record needs called out, and we need to get them out of power. And that's what I'm working tirelessly to do. What I'm not going to do is start speculating on theoretical outcomes, because if people start hearing that, they might think, well, why bother voting for them if they're only going to support another party? The point is that people need to see that we've got a common sense, conservative platform policy which shows that we're interested in reducing people's bills, reducing the cost of living, and reducing taxation. We've got a costed plan to do so, and that starts by dealing with the SNP's sky high and soaring benefits bill.